The World Chess Championship match 2024 is in full swing. 5 games have been played so far. The score is tied, 2.5, 2.5. And in game 6, it's the reigning world champion Ding Liren who is playing again with the white pieces. Gukesh is playing with black. And what does have the world champion in store for us? Well, in game 2, his first white game of the match, he played the move 1e4. In game 4, his second white game of the match, he played the move knight f3. Now, in game 6, he goes for the move d4. Another small surprise, well, not a big surprise. He has played it many times before, but you see that Ding is really trying to surprise his opponent by switching from one opening to another. What is Gukesh gonna play? Well, he played the move knight f6, bishop f4. London system in the World Chess Championship match. It's what Ding also played in his World Chess Championship match against Jan Nepomniachtchi in 2023. It's of course very interesting system. Can become very positional, can become very sharp. Let's see what's going to happen in today's game. d5, e3, e6, knight f3, c5, and white plays the move c3. So a very solid foundation. Pawns on dark squares, dark square bishop outside the pawn chain. So it's very difficult for black to crack white's setup. But black is rock solid as well. Played here the move bishop d6, offering the exchange of bishops. And well, if bishops are coming off the board, well, the queen is nicely placed on d6. But there followed bishop b5 check. How is black going to respond? Well, you better don't put a piece on d7 because then the bishop can be taken. So bishop b5 is a very interesting line. Black played here knight c6, blocking the check. Does seem to make a lot of sense as well. But now there follows bishop takes knight with check. Black does take back. Bishop takes d6. Queen takes d6. So why is white opting for this specific line? Well, he played here this move queen a4. Remarkable idea, but nowadays in the London system, very thematical plan. First of all, it does prevent black from activating his worst piece. That bishop would be fantastically placed on this diagonal, preventing the white king from castling. But also, positionally speaking, there are some dangers to black's position. If this bishop is going to be stuck behind its own pawns, well, it's probably going to be a problematic piece for black. But let's see what happens. Black castled here, which is a good move. And interestingly, this position was reached in a game. A very important game played by Ding himself back in 2023 in Tata Steel Chess. He was playing with the black pieces against Magnus Carlsen. Magnus played here the move castling kingside. We are not going to cover the game in detail, but it's important for your understanding what happens after this move. There is c takes d4, undoubling the pawns, and then there's the move c5. And looks like black is doing okay. I mean, after 37 moves, the players agreed to a draw in that game. I think Ding didn't really have any particular problems in that game. So it's interesting now that he is using this system himself with the white pieces in a very important game. And he tries to improve upon Magnus Carlsen's play. Instead of castling kingside, he played here the move queen a3. Interesting move. As you do attack the pawn on c5, the pawn on c5 cannot move. It will hang the queen on d6. But there is actually quite a bit of theory here still. And it seemed like both players were familiar with this specific line. Knight e4 was played here. Remarkable move, but it protects the pawn. It also defends the queen. When I was looking at this game, I was thinking knight bd2 is such a logical move. But it was not played. And the reason is that after c takes d4, you're kind of forcing white to take on d6. You would like to take back on d4, but that allows the move queen takes a3 when you would have to double your own pawns. And for that reason, Ding follows the engine's choice. Knight fd2 looks very strange to move with a piece which has already been developed. But this was seen in one game of Aronian against Wesley So. I give you some background information about this line. If you do take on d4, there's knight takes e4 first. Very important move. You attack the queen. Black will have to take on a3. Knight takes a3. Now white doesn't have to double his pawns, and knight is okay placed here. D takes e4, c takes d4. It's an interesting position, but I do believe that this knight is not worse than the bishop, and there's a pawn weakness on the c file White has quite a promising advantage, as was shown by Aronian, who went on to win that game. And therefore, Gukesh deviates here. He didn't take on d4. He played the move e5, which is the main move. But it's razor sharp. Black is opening up the position in the center so that the bishop from c8 has now an open diagonal. Knight takes e4. It's very concrete. Knight takes e4, d takes e4, queen takes c5. White is grabbing a pawn. But the pawn, it's not a very solid one. There is queen g6. Attacking the pawn on g2. And how are you going to deal with that? If you do castle, bringing the king into safety, there is bishop h3. With a mating threat, if you move the g-pawn, then it's bishop takes f1. The g-pawn cannot take the bishop. So there are some concrete problems. But instead of castling, Ding played here knight d2. Important move. Allowing black to take on g2, which was played in the game. And white castled queenside. The king goes into the other direction. So all of a sudden we have a London system, guys, with opposite castled kings. Frankly speaking, I cannot recall having seen something like this before. But apparently there's one other very important top level game. Queen takes f2. Grabbing another pawn, threatening to take the pawn on e3. And here there was one game of Aronian against Dominguez in St. Louis 2022. In which white played here the very modest move rook d e1. But I would say that pawn takes e5 is a more ambitious move. Taking the pawn, and the queen is defending the pawn on e3. What should black do? I mean, there are of course ideas here for white also to take with the knight on e4, not only grabbing a pawn, but therefore rook b8 is played, which means that the knight from d2 cannot move. If the knight takes the pawn, there is this move queen takes b2. That is a huge threat. Therefore, the knight goes into a different direction. Knight c4 played, keeping everything under control. But there is this move, bishop e6. Very important move, as you do threaten the knight and renew the threat of delivering checkmate on b2. Therefore, white played the move rook d2, attacking the queen. Queen goes to f3 to attack the rook on h1. Where's the rook going? That's an important question, because not only the rook is under an attack, still bishop takes c4, queen takes c4, and queen takes e3 is a serious idea here for black. That's why the rook goes to e1 to overprotect that pawn on e3. Anyway, bishop takes knight was played, queen takes c4. And how should we evaluate this very sharp position with major pieces only on the board? I mean, let's do the material count. I mean, white is having 6 pawns here and black also, but it's very strange pawn structure. Black looks like black has a better pawn structure on the king side, but pawn on c6 is weak as well. Hard to say what's the best move. They followed queen f5, which I tend to believe is quite a sensible move. But in general, very often in these sort of positions, what really matters is piece activity. And control over the open file really matters. I think something like rook bd8 is what the engine really likes to play here. And I mean, if white is going to take, you take back with the rook, and then black's rook on the d file will be quite annoying, covering a very important squares. But it's super complicated. Queen f5, I think it's also making quite a bit of sense. After queen takes c6, queen takes e5, at least these weak pawns are coming off the board, gives some clarity, and all of a sudden white is having a 3 versus 1 on the queen side. But you should understand, it's not easy to march forward with these pawns, because black will be able to generate counter-attacking ideas along the b and c file. While the same can be said for black's majority, it's a 4 versus 2 on the king side, but you don't really want to push these pawns because it will weaken the black king. White played here the move queen d5, offering the exchange of queens. I think Ding really wants to play it solid, but if queens would have been exchanged here, I think white is better. And the reason is very simple, that now the queens are off the board, it will become easier for white to come forward with the queen side pawns, with the support of the rook on d5. It's a fantastic piece, really. It's controlling the open file, the other rook can come over, you can walk over with your king. I think that white is really having good winning chances in that case. But therefore black is recommended here to keep queens on the board. Queen e7 played. And again, it's much more difficult to push pawns here because Once you push the pawns, your king will be more vulnerable. Queen d6, Ding is on a mission here. He really knows that he wants to exchange these queens. Queen to g5, keeping queens on the board. Queen d5, offering the exchange of queens, attacking the pawn on e4. The queen goes back. Queen d6, Queen g5, and again Queen d5. Ding Liren wants to make a draw. And it could be a threefold repetition here if Queen e7 would have been played by Gukesh. But Gukesh continues to fight here with the move Queen h4. Really remarkable decision, as I don't think he's objectively better here. I really trust here the control over the open file, the centralized pieces. That's what really matters. Of course, it's razor sharp. The rook on e1 is under an attack. White moved the rook away to d1. And it's very important to have these rooks and queen on the d file, because black cannot challenge the queen. You can sacrifice the queen, and that would be checkmate. If black takes on d8, it's rook takes d8 with back rank mate. So therefore, you see that white is in good shape here. g6 played. And what can be done now? I mean, white should try to find a way to improve his position. And I have mentioned earlier that it's difficult to push the pawns forward. But probably a move like c4 is not so bad here. Why in this position is better than on previous occasions? I think it's very simple, that the queen on d5 is much better placed than the queen on h4. White is everything well protected. You can play b3, king b2. You can put a rook on d4. You can put a rook on d2. You increase your position. And maybe at some point that c pawn is really going to be fast. And maybe one day it will be on c7, tying down the rooks. It's really not obvious, and the position is still super complicated, but white is probably better. Instead, queen e5 played, and I think Ding doesn't really enjoy himself here in this sharp position. After rook b e8, attacking the queen, here the move queen g3 is played. He really wants to exchange queens, and this time you can exchange queens, and probably this is still okay for white, but the position is razor sharp. This time pawn on g3 is much more vulnerable than it is on h2. But Gukesh wants to keep it as complicated as possible, which is understandable. It's a psychological game. He wants to keep playing with queens. So he played queen h5. Queen f4 played. To be honest, I don't really see what white is doing here. Queen a5 played. Queen is back, attacking the pawn. a3, defending against the threat. And now queen b5. So queen is excellently placed. White played here the move rook to d4, activating the rook, but the queen comes into e2. And that's just a bit annoying. I mean, if you do take on e4 here, the rooks can be exchanged, and then the pawn on h2 will be hanging. And positionally speaking, this is quite dangerous. Black has an outside passed pawn, and I think black... I would prefer to be black. Objectively, it's still equal, but I like black's position here. But Ding played it safe. He played rook 1 to d2, attacking the queen. Queen f3. This time, it's actually quite funny. Gukesh is offering the exchange of queens, but it's with a clear purpose. If queens are exchanged now, this pawn is quite annoying, as most importantly, rook takes e3 is a huge threat. And yeah, therefore you don't want to open up that e-file for the black rook. Here to follow the move king c2. Ding is improving his king and says that, okay, black, you can take on f4 if you want. And then the pawn is on f4. Black has a passed pawn, and now after the move f5, it's even a protected passed pawn. Things are looking quite nice here, but this pawn is not really going to run fast. White played h4. What is he going to do with that pawn? e3 played, attacking the rook. The rook got to block, otherwise the pawn will run further. Rook e7, so that after king d3, the other rook can come to e8. Typical position for double rook endgames. The rooks are supporting the passed pawn. White cannot move that rook from e2 away. What can white do? Well, white has a majority, so you would expect white here to push his c pawn, but it was not played. But let me show you why. This is very instructive, and this could have easily gone wrong for white as well. If, for instance, black would had the option here to go king g7, and if running with b4, the king comes to h6, and then there is this idea to go king h5, to take the pawn, to bring up the king. And this king is a huge weapon. It's a really strong piece. It will support a passed pawn, and black has good winning chances in that case. And therefore, to avoid that problem with your h-pawn, Ding played here the move h5. Remarkable move, but he says that he wants to exchange that pawn weakness so that that black king can never pick up the pawn. But it's remarkable. You just give away the pawn. G takes h5 was played. It's a very ugly move, but a pawn is a pawn. I mean, these pawns are quite weak. If you do find time here as white to challenge these pawns, then white can also easily win the game. But they followed rook d5. So here the idea is to take the pawn on f5. If you defend that pawn with one of your rooks, then the pawn on e3 can be taken. And the king will be very close to deal with the h-pawn. And then the 3 versus 1 should eventually be decisive, especially when one pair of rooks is coming off the board. Things are looking quite dangerous for black. Black played here this move h4. Very interesting. Rook takes pawn on f5. And here it is rook to d7 to chase away the king from challenging the pawn on e3. The king goes back to c2. And now it is the move king to g7. What's this king gonna do? Maybe he wants to attack the rook on f5. That could be one idea, of course. But rook g2 was played. Check. Attacking the king. You have to be careful. If you want to activate that king, you run into a mating net. There is rook f6 check. King h5, it is rook g5 with checkmate. I mean, these rook endgames, especially double rook endgames, they are very tactical by nature. So you got to be aware of that. The king went back to h8. And, well, it's an interesting moment because here, if black has the chance, he would go for the move e2 and e1 queen. What is white going to do? Well, you have to be careful. When I was looking at the position, I was thinking, I really want to go rook e5 to exchange one pair of rooks. But that's a huge mistake. It was not played by Ding, but let me show you the following line. I think it's important for your understanding of this endgame. There is rook takes rook, pawn takes back. And now, remarkable resource. It's rook d2 check. Rook takes d2, pawn takes d2. King takes d2 and it's h3. The h-pawn is out of reach. And if you advance the e-pawn, then the black king is just within the square. And even if you play e7, the king can stop the pawn while the h-pawn is out of reach. So that is important. I mean, I see that Gukesh was looking for these sort of tactical opportunities, but Ding is in reasonable shape and understood that he can just block the pawn here with rook e2. Then the pawn is okay. Maybe rook e5 is a potential idea, or maybe rook h5, rook takes h4. King g7 was played. And now it is rook to g2, king h8, rook e2, king g7. The players agreed to a draw. I mean, perhaps there were still ways to keep on fighting for both sides. But there's also quite a bit of risk involved, which was illustrated in the previous line with the transition into a king and pawn endgame. It's a remarkable game. I mean, you cannot say that Ding Liren didn't try. He played the London system. He tried to find an improvement. He found an improvement upon a game he played against Magnus Carlsen. And I think he was maybe a bit better at some point in that middle game if he would have played a bit more actively with a move like c4 with the centralized pieces. He had chances to play for more, but well, he decided to play it safe, and well, he got a half point for it. I think both players are not unhappy with the outcome of this game. 6 games have been played so far. We're almost halfway the match, 14 games in total. Score is 3-3, and we're going into another rest day on Monday. But the match isn't over yet, guys. We are actually starting, so it's getting really, really excited in the coming days. And I will keep you posted on the developments in this match. Make sure to follow the latest action by subscribing to the channel. Really appreciate all your support, guys. Thanks for subbing, and I will see you soon again. Bye-bye.